Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I wanted to introduce our speakers today. I'm Amy Millard. I am the CMO of Spigit. We're really delighted today to have two really great experts in innovation and what it means for Fortune 500 companies. By way of background, just to explain a little bit about what they do, Bobby Cameron is Vice President and Principal Analyst serving CIOs at Forrester Research. He's a leading expert on the best practices for IT, including transformative technology and the use that drives business success in the emerging world of business technology, like IT value creation, technology-based business innovation, and digital business networks. Bobby also founded the CIO group and the Forrester leadership boards, and he writes a lot of the CIO targeted research. So welcome, Bobby. I'd also like to welcome Joel Morris, who's the Director of Ignite Innovation at Optum. Optum is the $87 billion revenue subsidiary of United Health Group, which this year Forbes named the world's most admired company. So Joel's background is he runs the Ignite Innovation Group at Optum, which is responsible for all the innovation practices both at Optum as well as at United Health Group, or UHG as they say. Joel's been at Optum for a little over a year. Before that, he got his MBA at NYU. He's also a serial entrepreneur, and I'll be sure to ask him a little bit more about Qubels later in the conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the ball over to Bobby and to his slides. Next slide, Jeremy.
Great, thanks, and hello, everyone. Appreciate your, whoops, there we go. Appreciate your joining us. What I'll try to do today is talk through a bunch of perspectives on how digital innovation's impacting company performance. And so we'll begin with this slide that sort of addresses the question I frequently get asked is, who is being impacted by digital? And this is a chart of 415 executives in medium to large companies. And you can see from the green bars, these are people who expect to be disrupted in the next 12 months. In the blue bars, people who have already been disrupted. The point here being is that there is a huge array of sectors. In my experience, everybody from Newport News shipbuilding all the way up through retail and healthcare, as you can see, as the kinds of companies. Next slide, please. Now, the interesting part about this whole question is, are companies ready to move? And if so, what kinds of things are they doing? Well, the focus for companies, and this is a broad question we asked, and you can see the base. This was a very large survey, 18,000 people, decision makers from around the world, both from IT and from business organizations. And we asked them this question: which initiatives are likely to be among your organization's top? So no surprise, revenue, customer experience, improving products and services and costs, all these things are at the top. But notice how improving ability to innovate in there. And in fact, in my experience, the focus on innovation is that family of activities that are listed above it. So given the nature of the disruption, given the focus on customer, which shows up in this slide in particular, a lot of the focus on innovation in this digital era is on the customer. Next slide, please. The question arises, who's ready? What kind of activities are they driving? If you're going to improve your ability to innovate, what are you going to work on? And so now we see here a specific question asked. Again, this is a moderately large survey, global, and the same sort of mixture of business and IT respondents. And this question, so these are people who are focusing on innovation, so that bar that we saw on the previous slide. And now we're asking them, what are you investing in? Emerging technologies leads the list. That's why it's a digital conversation, looking at mobile and analytics and cognitive computing, those sorts of things. But notice as well that collaboration and working with partners in particular sits next to the top. One of the points we'll talk about as we go forward, innovation, open innovation frequently is a term that's used to address it, innovation addresses a very large number of sectors, and we'll hear some from Joel about what Optum is doing to engage across their value stream in order to improve the overall capability to deliver value. So the point here is to say these companies are looking at a wide variety of activities. Notice business processes is in there, 35% focusing there. So a lot of interest in innovation across the value stream and across technologies and partners and the like. Next slide, please. So in the midst of innovation and the discussion of digital disruption, there's a question that I feel is frequently unaddressed. If you woke me up in the middle of the night and you said, "What is innovation?" my initial response would be, "Oh, it's something that's brand new and it's bright and shiny," right? Turns out, in the research we've been doing now for 14 years, the definition, and this is a definition we published first in 2002, the definition is actually anything that generates business results. And that's an important piece, and I'll give you an example why. An innovation workshop I was doing in Paris, and I had 22 companies represented, and we were discussing this very point, the question of definition, and I knew one of the companies very well, a specialty chemicals manufacturer who I knew had taken SAP and its supply chain optimization tool, APO, and had implemented it across the firm and moved from plant level optimization to global optimization and driven by a customer, by the way. Procter & Gamble was demanding that they order globally. And so and by the way, they achieved about a 30% improvement of cost of goods sold, and I pointed this company out, and I said, now here's a great example of innovation. And the Frenchman who ran innovation for that company crossed his arms and legs, very uncomfortable body language, and I can't do French, but he said, SAP's not innovation. And yet it was. Not for everybody else. Everybody else who does supply chain optimization has that tool in place, may or may not do global optimization. In his case, it changed significantly how that company operated and the profits they made and how they could serve their customers. So the point here, the bullets below this definition, says, with definition saying it's anything any idea that drives new business results. The innovation doesn't require new inventions, only new business value. Think about the iPhone, been out for 8 years, but when it first came out, it was built on prior inventions. The iPod family that developed the whole UI, iTunes developed the market model that became the apps market, the cellular evolution that was underway through other vendors that Apple took advantage of. That was bright and shiny and new only because they had taken these existing innovations and applied them differently, which is exactly what that specialty chemical company did. A couple of other points, speed of innovation trumps the idea source. There are a bunch of companies who've gotten locked into the notion, if I didn't invent it, if it's not my intellectual property, it's not going to be useful to me. And certainly that's true of some things. But you look at a company like Procter & Gamble, number 2 in patents generated in the U.S. behind IBM. Procter & Gamble in 2002 launched a program. Their CEO said, I might have 7,500 of the world's best engineers, but I really want to source from the 1.5 million who are probably almost as good, tongue, of course, in cheek. And so what they did is continued to develop their own intellectual property, but they also turned to the market program called Connect and Develop and sourced intellectual property from all over the place. The goal Lafley set, the CEO set in 2002, was in 8 years to come up with with half of their new product revenue coming from IP intellectual property they did not own. He succeeded. They succeeded. And the way they did it is not by going out and buying companies, but by licensing the intellectual property. So the point being that sped their time to benefit, significantly leveraged their go-to-market capabilities, which they were equally good at, and helped drive significant business results. And finally, this key point I've mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning, innovation opportunities are across the entire value stream. So it's products, services, business models, processes, org structures, you name it. and so that there is no limit. Why is this definition so big? This is where companies are working. Now, does that mean companies don't focus? Well, of course they do. And next slide, please. The companies focus based on what they're trying to accomplish. And this funnel model is a good representation of how that works. So companies who sustain innovation over time use an efficient, meaning it's not a heavyweight process by any means, but a mechanism that allows them to continuously target opportunities, find great ideas, test them, validate them, bring them to market, commercialize them, and of course measure to keep the cycle going. Now, as I go into the next slide, don't turn the slides yet. As I go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the techniques, but for this one I want to get just a little bit clear of the process. So targeting. Wide open, let's just collect random ideas and do something might sound like a great idea, and certainly companies do this, and Joel might mention some work that they do at Optum in that context. The point is that a specific innovation cycle needs to target results. Why? You know, funds are limited. You want to make sure you're focused on ideas that fit the strategy, maybe support trends, maybe meet customers' expectations, whatever the target is. So companies are successful take that approach. And in the world of digital disruption, it's critical too. You don't want to be wandering off. You know, I was just speaking to a life insurance company earlier today about innovation, and they're kind of wandering off thinking, well, maybe if we improve the ability of the customer to manage their in-house risk, property and casualty company does home insurance, manage their in-house risk, they'll buy more insurance from us. It might be a great idea, and certainly is a useful thing to look at, but may or may not be the key target to meeting the customer needs. Probably more critical from the research they've been doing on their customers would be improving cycle times for claims, or setting up a new account. It takes them two weeks, whereas a fully digital competitor can set up an account in 90 seconds. So targeting is critical, understanding where the value is and going after that. Ideation, the collection of ideas, lots and lots of wonderful approaches. We'll talk about some of them in a minute, but in the context of the targeted business strategies, that's the key. So the ideation's in the right format. Ideation cycles typically are pretty short. I've seen companies drive 3-4 day ideation cycles. Some might run 4 or 5 weeks. But the point is keeping it targeted so people stay engaged. Incubation, interesting and important piece of the cycle, is about testing. So it's an iterative, validating what the activities are that work, testing it with the customers or wherever the business value resides. Now, commercialization may sound like an obvious piece, and it's certainly typically not funded by innovation cycles itself. Commercialization meaning scaling, being able to have technology that can handle the volumes, meet various kinds of regulatory requirements, deliver the performance characteristics that meet the policies meet your policies, your approach. This commercialization frequently is not part of the innovation activity, and you run into companies. A pharmaceutical company in the UK does a great job at generating ideas, and essentially once they've incubated them, they put them on the shelf and sort of, you know, invite the business to take them and do something with them. They don't have a mechanism to build a business case as part of incubation and deliver that into the commercialization cycle, where typically it's done by normal development resources and bringing things to fruition directly. And finally, measuring. The process, any process, is better handled if you understand what the objectives are, test how well you are meeting those objectives, and tune the process to improve them. So there are two sets of metrics. One is how well is the process running, how many people participated in the ideation activities, how many ideas were incubated, how many were commercialized, and most importantly, given the definition of innovation, what was the business result of that activity and how did that match with the target. The second set of metrics have to do with testing out the process, I mean, the outcome. So that whole piece of did we get the value we sought is critical. So this process, lightweight, can't be heavily, it gets managed by an innovation team. We'll hear from Joel what Optum does. It also has to impact or reach out across the ecosystem, so it's not necessarily isolated. Can be. Allstate Insurance does a process that frequently will isolate a given cycle in a given business unit. But the cycle itself is critical to be able to target and drive value. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned a bunch of different kinds of approaches that are in here across specifically ideation, incubation, and commercialization. A lot of people do pure R&D. Got to make sure, like that pharmaceutical company in the UK, you got to make sure you drive through to commercialization. Hackathons, time-boxed ideation by itself, emerging technology watch list, none of those do okay if you're just doing that piece. You need it hooked into this cycle so that it falls through to the next stages. Prototyping internal labs, Scrum-based sprint. By the way, a lot of people don't understand the Agile technique is in fact itself a wonderful part of innovation, a wonderful piece of innovation cycle. And there are companies out there who will use an ideation activity as the way to fill the backlog of a sprint, and then do test and learn in the incubation activity, so the incremental deployment or the daily stand-ups even, validating ideas and implementing the ones that work. So it's a wonderful cycle by itself. And of course, third parties are critical as well. Acquisitions and partnerships are out there, plus third parties. And it's not, third parties is not a thing to be thought of as a crutch or something that's only done by those who can't afford it. You look at a company like Nestle, gargantuan company, and in its incubation outpost in San Francisco, it comes up with ideas through its own ideation cycle, but does the incubation work frequently through third parties, like Willow Tree out of Charlottesville, Virginia. The reason they do that is that Nestle doesn't necessarily have the staff in place to do the incubation. It's looking for people who work the leading edge, and that's what Willow Tree does. It targets the leading edge and staffs accordingly. So the third-party incubators, accelerators, they can be wonderful partners to get that incubation done, and some of them it will even work with you through the commercialization, so the first product release. And of course, background work through innovation tours and the like can be a wonderful way to collect ideas. But the point here is that be sure you work through to commercialization. Don't stop with just ideation and incubation. Great ideas are a dime a dozen, even if you've proven them to be valuable, if you can't turn them into business results. Next slide, please. Now, the perspective of where you work, or the context in which you work inside your company is important. There are organizations out there, an equity trading firm does a very good job of finding ideas, but they do it inside IT. They don't engage outside of IT. They don't maintain a portfolio. They certainly don't have the implementation and commercialization structures tied in. They think they're just about ideation and incubation. So the process falls apart. And so I strongly encourage you, when you're looking at a funnel and how you operate, think about the broad base of capabilities as shown here for idea management, implementation, and control structures, to make sure you're paying attention to the whole picture to make the sustained innovation work well. And again, this is not the level of control and structure you get, let's say, in traditional annual funding activities. By no means. It's almost always very lean, cross-function. The steering committees or teams that help drive this typically cross-function. But the goal is speed and flexibility. The control is just to make sure that you're driving to strategies, that you're working in the right context, whatever that context is, and being able to deliver the value. Next slide, please. And finally, the key message I brought in earlier is important to reemphasize. Innovation works best in an extended ecosystem. This whole concept of digital disruption is driven by the expectations of the customer, as each of us as individuals have been become enamored of the digital device and how that works, how that manifests value for us, and we have that expectation of how we work with companies. And therefore, the design point even for a process improvement, is increasingly the customer and the various parts of the ecosystem that drive the value in. So seeing that value from the customer's perspective, through partners, through suppliers, as well as competitors, as much as you can learn about what they're learning, very, very useful. And they're also academic institutions, research, government, regulatory. All of this should be part of the network that you use to discover ideas. And looking at the Procter & Gamble example, to do the ideation activity, engaging those people is very rich. And then in the incubation cycle, work with the appropriate parts of the value stream to make sure the value is delivered correctly. The life insurance company I was talking to this morning does a very good job of working with its agencies to get them involved in the conversation. So while it may not be politically good at reaching across the company and to commercialization, from an ideation perspective, is reaching across its value stream. So that's the key message here. The key message is that if you're dealing with any kind of innovation, but especially with the customer-driven digital disruption era need for customer-based innovation, be sure you've got the complete picture. So it works from targeting ideas through that funnel into ideation, delivering the test models, incubation, iterative testing so that you discover what works, validating that with your customer base, and then commercializing, making sure you do the whole piece, and of course using metrics to tie the process together and help fuel ongoing work. Now that's the big picture. We'll turn now to Joel and have him talk about what he's specifically doing at Optum and give you some wonderful case study examples of how all this works out. Joel?
Thanks, Bobby. Again, my name's Joel Morris. I work at Optum. I manage Ignite Innovation, which is the crowdsourced managed services team within Optum. We are one amongst many who focus on innovation all across the organization. I'm going to dive in a little bit to a specific part of what Bobby was talking about, the ideation part, and how we utilize crowdsourcing as a creative and I would say somewhat disruptive tool in the way that we think about it within our organization. My hope is that after this, I might have inspired anyone to think a little bit differently about how you engage and collaborate with employees and allow them to plug in. Think about how you might unearth some of these disruptive ideas or trends that are coming towards your organization by reaching out to different people across the organization. With that, next slide, please. Just a little background for those who might not be familiar. Optum is part of United Health Group, Fortune number 6, more than 200,000 employees across the two major business lines, which is United Healthcare on the benefits side and Optum on the services and technology side. My group resides in Optum, but services the entire organization. An example is in 2016, we supported programs, 120 programs across the organization internally and 30 externally. And the group's been around for about 6 years. Next slide, please. Over those 6 years, we've seen a lot of benefits from utilizing crowdsourcing. For anyone who might not be 100% familiar with crowdsourcing, to us it's the combination of processes and technologies to allow crowds to submit ideas and opinions and thoughts and collaboration in a virtual environment. As I said, we use it pretty significantly across the organization on an annual basis as a tool in our innovation tool belt. Some of the benefits we've seen from it is we do believe it provides a channel for employees to voice their ideas and become more connected to the organization should they desire. It engages employees in the business and innovation process. You can include employees who might not otherwise have been included in this type of effort to be so. We utilize it and believe it increases organizational capacity. We're working to connect groups and include people across the organization on a consistent basis. We also, in collaboration with a lot of the other innovation groups across the company, believe that there's a greater effort to expand the innovation mindset and bring tools and capabilities and thought processes that don't just apply in a specific scenario with the title of innovation, but more so to everyday mindsets when employees are doing their work. And then lastly, we definitely have seen filtered ideas generated that are actionable and add value to the organization, which is the ultimate output of a lot of our crowdsourcing efforts. Next slide, please. Over the 6 years, we've developed a handful of different uses that we utilize it for across the organization, and to us, this creates and contributes to an ecosystem. The main product or use case that we utilize are what we call challenges. Some people call them campaigns. We use these on large-scale company-wide efforts all the way down to unit-specific group challenges. And a challenge is, let's use a live example. If I'm the chief operating officer, let's say, of a hospital system, and it's fall and I'm interested in looking for innovative ways to save, to cut costs across the organization, I might utilize a challenge. It would be a time-boxed event, maybe run anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks. There'd be a period where the employees across the organization can submit their ideas, see everyone else's ideas, collaborate, comment, and ultimately vote on ideas and weigh in on what they think would be some of the most impactful, all funneling into a expert review or executive review round, looking to take these ideas that Bobby was talking about earlier and funnel them into some sort of exploration or implementation or incubation pipeline. If you can imagine seeing across the organization this happening consistently monthly in different ways across the organization, we support that with another environment we call forums. These are always open models, and these are, imagine a website where an employee can contribute an idea at any time, and there's an accountable review structure behind the scenes to help those funnel through more in what you would maybe think of a continuous improvement type environment. These two uses put together, challenges and forums, are really creating avenues and channels for employees to connect if they decide to opt in and be part of the process. Along with those, we support nomination programs, crowd-based programs that allow employees to recognize and submit applications for projects to be recognized on an annual basis. We think along with including employees, it's important to recognize the good work that comes out of our innovation efforts. And then more recently, we're working on creative, innovative connections across the organization using new tools and techniques like text analytics and such to assess our data and look for collaborative opportunities and make connection points that can lead to more valuable innovation across the organization. All that to be said is we're using it, and I hope you can think of it as ways as a tool that can be used in many different ways across an organization to add value. Next slide, please. So as we aspire to generate impact across the organization in these different use cases, another evolution of our team internally, the Ignite team, that is that we've made the services very scalable. We run programs for a group of 20 and similar ones for 200,000 with different goals in mind, different scope, and the idea being that we are helping to create an ecosystem that can help funnel through not just the big ideas like most people think of running a challenge for, looking for big ideas across a big population, but also contributing to the avenues to have small and medium-sized ideas. Different sized projects can contribute to this portfolio of innovation. We believe that we've seen that maximizes the return, as you would think about it, of the investment in crowdsourcing as a tool within an organization. Next slide, please. So when thinking about a program like this or utilizing crowdsourcing in such a way, we think of three measurements that are really our pillars for how we deem this success. And the first of which is engagement, which is usually fairly intuitive. How many people are submitting, commenting, voting, and getting involved with the programs. We then, that usually evolves into thinking about return. As Bobby mentioned earlier, you got, this all has to generate business results at the end of the day. And we are not in charge of that. We work closely with the business units, which is one of the keys, we believe, to our success. And ultimately, it's the business units or service lines that move forward into usually commercialization. So what we do is, when looking at a return to the program, is we work with them to understand what the likely outcome and impact from the projects that are curated working with us are going to have on the organization. Can say with confidence that these programs generate thoughtfulness and ideas that might not have been generated in traditional methods by allowing for employees to engage, and that the return seen across all of the work from the projects that are implemented or being implemented far exceed the cost of the program. And lastly, we're looking at employee growth. We're looking to see innovation award recipients from our program, helping to spread that innovation knowledge to the entire organization. We have seen people get job promotions or new jobs because they've engaged and they were given an opportunity to do so. And all that is how we measure our success. And keep in mind, the goal here is to try and create new and creative ways to get good ideas and engage our employee base. Next slide, please. So how we operate is something that a lot of times when I talk with individuals from other companies who are in innovation groups, the conversation of enablers versus doers comes up, or the idea is, are we the ones that are supposed to help provide innovation tool sets to the service lines and business units, or are we the ones doing it? And there's depending on how you invest and how you think about it, and structures both work, but we have positioned ourselves, being Ignite, as a turnkey crowdsourcing group, both internally and externally, that focuses on support and enablement. This means that we essentially act as consultants, advisors, outsourced operations. We are an expansion of a team that can come in and help make this work run efficiently, achieve effective results, and then make the connections and support a network that can help to incubate and then let the businesses do what they do well and operate and scale. That's how we've operated the organization largely. I think that's contributed to our success, focusing on being a supporting role in the innovation ecosystem. With that in mind, that's the end of my presentation. It was very high level. I hope it inspired some thought, some different ways to think about how you can creatively think about communicating with a crowd of people with an organization. How can you bring them into the fold? How can we leverage organizational capacity and make connections in new ways using the cool new digital, the tools that exist out there, with the ultimate goal of, as far as digital disruption being one of the outputs that can come from an effort like this. With that, I think I'll turn it back here to Amy. Should there ever be any questions beyond today, please feel free, obviously, to reach out to me. I'm happy to help.
Thanks, Joel and Bobby. At this point, I've got a number of questions, and I also encourage everybody here. We left a lot of time for questions because we know that both these guys are experts, and many of you are thinking about how to implement these ideas within your own company. To get started, my first question actually is for Joel. In Bobby's section, he discussed in sustained innovation, it requires at a company lots of capabilities, not just innovation. At Optum, since you guys have been doing this for 6 years, what is your implementation structure? That's what Bobby called it. How do you ensure the execution of good ideas? You talked a lot about what your team does, but on the receiving side, what structures has Optum set up so that employee ideas actually are vetted and taken into market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within my group is part of a larger innovation. My team at Ignite is a part of a larger innovation group within Optum, and that innovation group offers more resources that can help with the incubation phases of working through ideas, and all of my team and that team are focused on working closely with the business units such that they can handle any sort of commercialized scalable efforts. At the Optum level, there is then a governance review structure which takes and assesses the ideas and the projects that are coming through, reviews them, and helps to facilitate them across the various business units within the organization. So there is a effort across company-wide, a governance effort at the top level, and then innovation groups in combination with the business units that collaborate to take ideas all the way through the idea, all the way from what we do, generate ideas, to the commercialization.
And the next question is for Bobby. You talked a lot about what companies should do in order to sustain innovation. If you were to say 1 to 2 areas where companies most often fail in their innovation initiatives, sort of the 2 things to watch out for, or to prevent, or to make sure don't happen, can you give some guidelines on that?
So I might do 3. The first one I mentioned several times is you've got to engage across the ecosystem, and that's not just for sources of ideas. It's also about the politics of driving things forward. You heard the model that Optum uses, where ideas are generated and driven to commercialization in collaboration with the business organizations who would be delivering that value. That kind of activity is critical to success. So that's number 1. And think about it as change management. If I'm off in a corner by myself thinking up great ideas, and I go validate them in some sort of narrow-minded test situation, I'm the only one bought into them. If I engage with those who might have to change a process, might have to manage a technology, might have to interact with the customer, wherever the value proposition is, if I'm working with them from the very beginning, they participate in ideation, maybe even setting the targets, they participate in the incubation and help pick out the best ideas and help build the business case to drive commercialization, it's already sold. The politics are done. So that's number 1. The second one, which is a very important piece, is to make sure that that the people who are involved in the ideation activities are rewarded for their participation. And that what you saw in Joel's slides, it reminded me, in my voiceover I didn't mention that, but rewarding participation is critical. Letting people know that what happened to their idea. If it didn't get into an incubation cycle, recognize them. Say, thank you very much for your contribution. And most companies do this. They save the ideas in a portfolio for the next round where they might be more relevant. So being sure to recognize, and it doesn't, and even for people who get ideas into incubation or might even be commercialized, doesn't have to be a big reward or recognition. Companies out there might give $100 for somebody's idea gets into incubation, but it's the recognition that tends to be the biggest motivator. So that's the second one: recognize participation, because it'll keep the pump primed. People will keep participating. And the third one I would add in is this ecosystem, this innovation network that's critical, particularly in the digital world. Don't expect to be able to do these things in isolation. It's an end-to-end business problem, whatever it is nowadays, so treat it as such.
Thanks, Bobby. There's a question from the audience, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and I think it's for Joel. It's a specific question about the vertical of medical research and hospitals and medical research hospitals. And the question is, today, a lot of the knowledge sharing and the ideas that get taken forward to execute are done in small rooms and small groups with often a sort of a dominant personality or dominant expert deciding what happens. Have you found using crowdsourcing with Spigit or to be a better way to give everybody at a hospital a chance to bring their ideas to market, or a hospital's a different case and crowdsourcing doesn't work there?
That's a great question. I always view it as both methods have value, in the sense of sometimes it's valuable to get a group of experts in a room to work on something, and sometimes it's valuable to engage the crowd, or they work together. Maybe the experts are talking about some of the strategic stuff they're working on, and then they utilize a crowd to ideate and give their feedback on some of those thoughts. Within the hospital, from the work that we've done, I think that crowdsourcing, and this probably applies to any organization, is a wonderful way to get more employees the ability to engage into that process. So, an example was we ran one for a children's hospital, and they were able to garner, it was just in one of their nursing groups, not a huge group. They were able to garner 30-something great ideas that were curated from all over the group. And I don't think that breadth of ideas for a small group of, I think it was a couple hundred, would have come to fruition if you just had a couple in a room. And one more note I'll say on that is it's not isolated to a hospital. I think that's true in any organization. One of the ones I worked prior was a manufacturing organization, and they had the similar environment where a couple people would always be the ones that got together around coffee to think about the next season's products. And when I took over as an innovation role there, we started to open up the ability to allow a lot more people to contribute to that process, and a handful of products moved through very quickly that just likely might not have been recognized if that group hadn't been expanded. So I hope that's helpful, but I definitely believe that utilizing crowdsourcing will allow you to get ideas that wouldn't have otherwise been curated in an isolated scenario.
And let me maybe say even more strongly that healthcare in particular is a group sport. It's a very complicated group of organizations that get involved. From research is separate from development, is separate from a drug standpoint. Research and development and go to market, clinical trials can frequently be done by 4 different companies. Hospitals are frequently, increasingly in networks that bring in clinics that doctors increasingly are running independently, labs that may or may not be independent, on and on throughout the process, so that the belief that there's any individual element in this complex network of organizations that provide health care, fund it, and the various modalities is a mistake. And you can see that mistake being remedied by a variety of places. Kaiser Permanente has done a great job of taking modality performance over time and demonstrating through analytics what's working and what's not. You can see the same sort of collection of data going on in several of the clinical trials companies who are gathering data from any and everywhere, not only from their trials, but to understand what kinds of experiences there are. All the way down to smaller activities. Ottawa Hospital Network, about 4 or 5 hospitals in Ottawa who work together. Their innovation is a very small team, and what the gentleman who runs it, what he does is he pulls together all the practitioners associated with a given practice, that's the target, and engages with them whether they're inside the hospital network or not, in order to come up with the solutions that work. So I would strongly encourage, unless you've got a real serious competitive piece of intellectual property that you think will make or break your future, reach out beyond.
Here's a question. I think, Bobby, if you could start, and then Joel comment. We get often at Spigit, and it's the role of the innovation practice. Is that a permanent role, or is that a role that should work itself out of its own business and become ingrained in the rest of the organization? And Optum, clearly, they've got this innovation group. What models have you seen, Bobby, and what's your perspective on that?
So innovation should be everybody's business, but then there's a methodology that this process, and like any process, it works best with some care and feeding. So Joel's model, the Ignite Innovation team that he runs, is a wonderful example where he doesn't come up with the ideas. Well, I guess he does too. He's a bright guy, but his team really is there to help facilitate and ignite the activities, and so therefore they drive the engagement. They aren't an isolated team that works in a corner. They are in fact the lubricant for ideation across the entire group, United Healthcare Group. There are situations where there are isolated teams. So I'll say the negative side of it. There are isolated teams that try to do it all by themselves. That doesn't work. And there are other people out there who think, well, I got to generate a culture of innovation. That means everybody's got to be innovating. In very few situations does that actually drive results. So yes, everybody should be involved, and you heard Joel emphasize that many times. But to get the process to sustain over time, there needs to be some funding, some ability to facilitate ideation, to drive the incubation, and build a business case for commercialization.
Yeah, I would agree with what.
A different question that I've got for Joel is, I heard you mention that you guys are doing innovation on behalf of Optum customers. You mentioned Children's Hospital, and I think another example. Has your practice grown beyond just helping out Optum and United Health Group to helping customers, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have. And it's interesting. So that's growing somewhat organically, as well as we've become skilled at what we do. The value that we've seen to work with clients and actual customers utilize us as a service has grown. It varies in scope. Sometimes it's a partnership, in which case we're collaborating on an innovation effort, and we will utilize crowdsourcing as a tool with our client to achieve a specific goal. And for some others, it's actually just it's utilized as a traditional service where we offer our expertise and become an expansion of the team to help them bring crowdsourcing as a tool into the organization to develop a program similar to what we've been developing at Optum and United Health Group. And interestingly is what we've noticed from some of the longer standing groups that we worked with is as we support the growth of their program will have a similar trajectory that grows over time within the organization, and ultimately gets to the point where outside constituents come into consideration. So it's been I know for everyone who's been involved the entire way, it's been a great journey to watch it grow internally and then become something that we can utilize externally with all the organizations that we partner with.
And that what Joel's talking about too is, as he said, but I want to emphasize it since I live in multiple sectors, it is exactly what goes on with digital. That there are very few examples of a value stream of a industry sector where everything that goes on is contained in one entity. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. There are more and more providers. Now, healthcare is a great example of it, and I walked through a list of those a minute ago, but there's no sector I know of that doesn't have multiple players who participate in creating value for the ultimate customer. Therefore, if you're going to innovate in the value proposition that's driven by the customer, which is the focus of the digital transformation, you got to have all the players engaged. Rules will change based on regulation and all kinds of stuff, but you got to engage.
Yep, I fully agree.
You raised a good point about digital transformation, and I was reading a couple of Forrester reports about predictions for 2017, and I think pretty much every single one of them mentioned the phrase digital transformation. Can you describe, from your perspective, the role of innovation in helping CIOs address digital transformation?
Exactly. So a real quick definition for digital transformation, it's use of digital technologies, that's computer-based stuff, to improve customer experience and drive operational excellence. So it's the entire value stream, not just the engagement part for the customer, and it does include third parties. Now, the temptation is to think that that's the end state. It's not. That is just one leg in moving forward with what we call becoming a customer-obsessed business. So there's an operating model we found that is customer-led, insights-driven, fast, and connected. That is an enterprise-level change. And United's a great example of a company doing this, and that's what Joel's a part of. And these companies who do this well use digital transformation. So the use of the digital technologies to radically change how they operate. So healthcare payers 5 years ago were all about managing risk and keeping the cost down, and that was what they did most of the time. Now you get them, and Optum, and United Healthcare are a perfect example of what's going on as these guys wake up and realize they've got to change how they deliver value. So, like Joel was saying, in the connection out through the providers, when United Healthcare is doing customer journey mapping, they call it constituent journey mapping, and they're looking at the providers as well as the customers, ultimate patients, to make sure that the value is delivered, so that helps them manage risk and helps them cut costs, but it's so that they can compete better. Did that work for you?
So one last question before we sum up. It's from somebody on the webcast. Is they're just launching an innovation role in the company, and they're evangelizing this to the senior executives. What are the 1 to 2 to 3, Bobby, to help you out there, points to focus on to help the executives decide whether or not an innovation role at their company makes sense?
So in my experience, there are lots of different personalities of executives and companies. So the most conservative version would be there's a European automotive manufacturer. CIO wanted to do exactly what you're talking about, drive a business case for innovation, but he wanted some proof cases. So instead of trying to tackle the corporate executives, he found a couple of business units that were interested in innovation, and he ran a couple of years of proof cases where he ran cycles, developed and ran cycles, and showed he could do it and sustain it and deliver significant value and get good participation, good engagement, to use Joel's word. And then he took it to the group level, the corporate level organization, and having proof cases in his pocket. So that's a very conservative version. Other companies have, to stay in the healthcare sector, a European pharmaceutical company. The CEO was petitioned by 2 or 3 business units to do innovation. He looked at it and said, wow, you're right. We really have to change not only the drugs and how we go to market, but we need to change everything about our practice to get beyond this miasma the big drug companies are in around having to have blockbuster drugs to survive. And so he launched a team, put 40 people in it from across the company to do with the team that Joel, not only Joel's Ignite team, but the overall innovation team at United does in Optum. and he built that team and said, go for it. And they were successful because the CEO was interested. So bottom line is pick the strategy in the continuum between those extremes I just mentioned that'll work in your situation. You don't have to go big first. You can actually prove it out incrementally. But if you got an exec who's willing, then go for it.
So at this point, I'd like to thank everybody, in particular Joel and Bobby, for the fantastic content today. For the attendees, we will be sending out copies of the slides as well as a recording, so you won't have had to memorize all the great advice that you got today. And thank you again for attending, and everybody else have a great day.